I welcome everyone to this week's edition of Daytime Dialogues with my dear colleague, Rabbi Efrem Goldberg of BRS, of the Boca Raton Synagogue in Florida. Rabbi Goldberg is what we rabbis refer to as one of the superstars of the rabbinic world, in the way that he has found new ways to engage thousands of people through social media, through distance, even before we ever thought we had to be distant. And I really appreciate the time he's giving us. You may also notice that in my background, I have a different picture this time, because this is a picture of BRS at Marav Minyan, I assume.
That was actually early Shacharis.
Really?
Yeah, that was the 6:15 a.m.
Wow. Okay. Well, you guys were really early. And that early Shacharis, and it's just a tribute to the way things are moving forward in Florida and to his care and concern in this time. I don't think, does Florida have the same restrictions? We're only allowed 10 people at this point. Where's Florida at?
We're at a little bit more. Most of our restrictions are self-imposed because the government doesn't have such rigid restrictions.
So let's just start with some simple things, Rabbi. What's it like right now in Florida? Are people nervous? Are people opening? What's happening? We see the pictures of the beaches, but...
Sure. So first of all, let me say what an honor it is to be here. And I don't know if the term superstar I do know is not accurate, but I will say that Rabbi Matanki has only become a dear friend, but is a mentor in many ways. And I and so many of my colleagues look up to you and for your leadership previously through the RCA, still through the RCA, and through so much more. And I'll tell you this, for rabbis who have enormous amount on our shoulders right now, and whether we're self-appointed or we've been asked by others to be guiding the community in some of these issues, the saving grace, what really gives strength and solace, is the kinship that we have with one another. And the fact that I share a couple WhatsApp groups with Rabbi Matanki, and we have the ability to laugh, to cry, share banter, and most of all to share guidance with one another has been an enormous source of help for me personally. So I want to use this public opportunity to thank you, Rabbi Matanki, for that friendship and that mentorship and all that you've been giving me. In Boca,
I thank you for that, and I will make sure my mother sees that portion of the show.
And make sure that our other friend in the Northeast doesn't. In any case, what's going on here in Florida? So, Florida, we were bracing. A lot of the models had us as being hit potentially really hard. Early on, the governor shut off travel from areas of the country, which I won't name because previously when I named them, I got threatened a rock through my front window of my home, literally. So I won't mention, even though I'm from that area. But the places that were the hardest hit, that everyone should stay put where they are and not migrate even to a vacation spot, even to where someone might have a second home early on. And the fact that the community really, for the most part, cooperated is attributed with having a huge help in protecting us. We never saw that outbreak. So I can tell you that we are beyond lucky. We are beyond blessed. We thank Hashem each and every day. Confirmed cases from our shul is close to 900 families, and confirmed cases are really very few. They're really very few. In terms of not only confirmed cases, but actually people who were in very dangerous, precarious situations. There's one who was on a respirator. One of our beloved Sephardic members was on a respirator for some time. And thank God, he is doing much, much better. So we are beyond blessed that we had no direct casualties. We had members of our shul who lost loved ones, but no direct casualties. And really only that one case of emergency, for the most part, we were spared. Now that's a bracha and a klala. It's a blessing and a curse. The blessing obviously is people are healthy. The curse is it's been hard to get people to remind them why we need to cooperate when they say, I don't even know somebody who sneezed. There's no one around me who's got allergies. Why are we distancing? Why are we wearing masks? Why are we not having play dates? Why are we still doing all of this? So Palm Beach County, the three southern counties of South Florida, which have the most connection with the Northeast, were the last to open. The governor first opened all the other counties of Florida, but then he started opening us, actually Palm Beach, us, then Broward, then Dade. And we began a couple weeks ago. So this past Monday, 2 days ago, was 2 weeks since when we had our phase 1 opening, which allowed for restaurants at 25% capacity. And since then, it's moved to 50% capacity. The mall is open, parks, golf, tennis, gyms, manicure, pedicure. These things are all opening. As we've been trying to communicate, just because the government says they're open doesn't mean they're smart to go to. So I have not gone out to eat in a restaurant, although I encourage supporting it through takeout and other ways. But that's where we're at. So we're still discouraging play dates, certainly without supervision. We've started to say that people can hang out in the backyard with distancing, with a mask, to have a visit, not to feel totally socially isolated. We're still not having Shabbos or Yontif meals with one another. And yesterday was day one of rolling out our outdoor minyanim.
And people are responding, or do you have the backyard minyanim that surprise you or things like that, or is it perfect, Florida?
I'm not going to say it's perfect, but to the best of my knowledge, we had some early on, we had some incidents, and we chose to take care of them discreetly and appeal to people, and they were responsive. And for the most part, people have been incredibly compliant. I would actually differentiate between compliance on the communal level and the individual level. What I mean is, we did not have breakaway minyanim before we really began. People were cooperating, and we've asked for the communal norms to be. But in terms of if you go for a walk on Shabbos afternoon, you'll see a lot of people not distancing. So on the personal level, in terms of whether they were really obeying those guidelines for play dates and for hanging out with one another and for maintaining distancing even while going for a walk, that I think there was a little more laxity. But on the communal level, people really complied, and I'm really proud of that.
It sounds a lot of like what we had here in Illinois, the expectations and the issues. Baruch Hashem, we've been spared much of the tragedy, even though there have been some pieces that have hurt. What I'm really curious about, and we were just exchanging some WhatsApps before where you made a comment, and I said, by the way, that's what I'm going to ask you about. I'm really interested in what you think about how things are going to change in shuls and Jewish life once we can come back together.
I have, like you and like our friends, I have not stopped thinking about that for 3 months. And I'll tell you that every decision that we make, and it's not me, we've blessed to have a great team of rabbis who work together. And the team is even beyond the BRS rabbis. You know, you're on our team. It's the fact that we all collaborate. Every decision we make is informed by that question. Not only what's the right decision for the here and now, but what's the unintended consequence when this is over. I'll give you an example. Yizkor. Some people on Chol HaMoed Pesach had a Zoom Yizkor service. I have no criticism of it. Halachically, I think it's a personal decision everyone had to make, and I know for many that worked out really beautifully, particularly if you had a Yizkor budget you had to make as well. So I have no criticism whatsoever of it. But we decided internally that we found a compromise. We sent out a Yizkor email where I had recorded a Yizkor drasha, and we had the Kel Maleh from a Holocaust survivor who would read the one for the martyrs every year, and some other appropriate Yizkor information, so that people who wanted to connect with that on Erev the last days of Yontif could, but still say Yizkor privately. Why didn't we do the Zoom Yizkor? For a simple reason, which we may be wrong about, but this was our thinking. If we introduce the possibility of Zoom Yizkor this year, what happens next year when someone comes and says, it's true that shuls have reopened, it's true that life has returned relatively to normal, but there's still a lot of older or infirm or women who it's inconvenient, still do an Erev Yontif Zoom Yizkor for those people. And Yizkor was one of those great drivers that brought people to shul who ordinarily didn't necessarily go. So that's the kind of decision where you can't make it just for the here and now, what works right now, but for future years. I'll give you a second example.
Well, before you do that, let me use that opportunity just to remind everyone that we're having a Zoom Yizkor tonight at 9:00, and that was one of our calculations, but we came on the other side of the equation than a BRS. So 9:00 on the regular KINS channel will be the Zoom Yizkor.
9:00 Chicago time. I think I tuned into your last one, and it's well worth it. It was great. It was a great treasure. So 9:00 Chicago time. If anyone's watching,
that's the only time there is.
That is the only. If only anyone's watching from Boca, which is 10:00 right after Behind the Bima, so that would work out perfectly.
We can
perfect segue.
Time right in.
So and I think I have no criticism of you. I really think it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. These are complicated decisions, and you're trying to predict the future, and we don't have a crystal ball. But I'll give you another example. The street lights in Boca Raton are very poor. I think somewhat by design, but very poor. So we have outdoor minyanim, neighborhood outdoor minyanim for Shavuos. So when should davening be? Tomorrow night, Thursday night. Now there is a custom. It's not universal, but it is, I think, practiced widely in order to achieve the tamimos to not daven marav on Shavuos night, the first night until tzeis, until nightfall. So do you keep that custom up this year, even though people will be outside, hard to read, might gather around the street light and therefore violate distancing, walk home in the dark, so many variables that might influence you to say, you know what, it's a nice custom, we'll go back to it next year. For this year, we'll daven marav right after shkia, right after sunset. But our thinking was, the second we introduced that this year, we've killed that custom for years to come. Other neighborhood minyanim outside the shul, we may return to davening at Tzeis Marav, but the neighborhood minyanim, because there is a segment of our population, and I love them, and I'm sure Rav Levi Yitzchak Berditchev would have some wonderful way to spin them. But there's a segment who say, you know what, if it was good enough then, it's good enough always. You rabbis, we know that you're tricks. If you can do it then, why can't you always do it? So Shavuos, it's late, we're hungry, we're tired, we want to daven early, they're going to do it forever. So we again found a compromise, which was, we said, let's honor the minhag, but let's define tzeis earlier than we ever do. Let's figure out the earliest possible definition of tzeis, so we'll be able to use still some light without relying all on the street lights, but still be able to say we're honoring the custom of waiting to tzeis. So those are two examples. There are many more of how we think about constantly what will be the impact of the decisions today when we come back.
So there was also one I was just asked right before this by a member about maybe we should limit the length of davening by doing a Heicha Kedusha for everything. In
Right.
Mincha, I believe that the CRC guidelines that are going to be coming out within about a week will have Heicha Kedusha for Mincha. But the suggestion was maybe we should for Shachris, for Musaf. There's a minhag in France, in Paris, they do a Heicha Kedusha at Musaf, an interesting kind of Heicha Kedusha for Musaf. And my response to the person was that actually, from public health, we're within the time frames of what is considered safe, and to start going down that road is risky. But I'm looking at the other thing. There are things we did. I am giving more shiurim. You're giving more shiurim by Zoom. My daf yomi at the shul is larger now with Zoom than it was in person. My Navi shir, this webinar that we're doing is something we'd never done before, and it's reaching audiences. I had an interesting email from a former member who went on Aliyah, who told me after every Thursday night, I normally give the drasha. This week it'll be with the Yizkor tonight. And the person wrote to me, says, most people binge watch Fauda. I binged watch your drushes.
That's great.
They wanted, which was great. I don't know what rating I got on it.
Yeah.
But some of those things we did, and I'm wondering, what are we going to take past here?
That's a great question. And also, we think about that all the time. And that's also a balance, because also my classes are more widely attended and more accessible. They're no longer geographically limited by having to be near our shul. So what happens? So when we resume, do we continue to teach live in person and offer a stream option? So will we see our numbers fall apart because people will say, why get dressed? Why fight for parking? Why fight for a seat? Why have to be on, I'll just, Zoom. Or do we cancel those Zooms because we say there's a value to community. There's a value to being kamayim panam apanam kein lev ha'adam. We have a whole tradition of the notion of community. You don't have a minyan if you're not all 10 in the same place. And you can't say Sheva Brachas if you're not all 10 in the same place. And you can't say Kedusha. There is a value to in-person community that can't be achieved even with the greatest gifts of technology that we have. So how do we as leaders try to anticipate how to utilize and take the best of what technology will offer, but also not unintendedly dissolve the value of community, of being in person. And by the way, weddings, right? My daughter got engaged, which was it wasn't controversial from my perspective, but for those who are uninformed.
There was a long explanation you provided.
Yeah, exactly. I never thought I'd send a mazel tov with a detailed medical report. So we're trying to plan a wedding, right? When, where, how, why. I'm not going to lie. I love the fact that unlike I love the last wedding we made too, and future weddings we'll make, thank God we can invite a whole community, but this will by definition be a different level of expectation of attendance. So what will be in the future? Will people say, you know what, I'm only making a wedding for 10 people, everyone else is invited over Zoom? There's value to that. There's certain benefit or certain progress from maybe some places we had been with simchas. On the other hand, what do simchas look like? Do people only pay shiva calls on Zoom because it's much more convenient? We no longer have shiva hours. So all of these things, how do we, and the biggest one, of course, is these minyanim. We had a Zoom meeting this morning of some of the rabbanim throughout our area, and some of the rabbis reported, and I shared with you an email from a major congregation in the Northeast that said, there's so many neighborhood minyanim, we've tried to resume outdoors in shul, and there's no interest. I wanted to tear kriya. That to me is a tragic statement. There aren't 10 Jews who say that even though doing it in my backyard or my neighbor's backyard is more convenient, but maintaining a consistency of being at the shul, even outdoors, supersedes my convenience and I'll be there. There weren't even 10. That shul had to announce, we can't produce a minyan at the shul. And some colleagues here in Boca have found that even though we've begun this week, they're not getting the influx that they hoped for, can't even necessarily make a minyan on their campus. So what happens now that we're such grace kanakers helping coordinate neighborhood minyanim, giving instructions and details, encouraging it, listing addresses and map technology and making it so easy? Can we turn that off when we want to turn it off and say, okay, everyone, it's time to come back to shul? Will that be so easy? Or are we introducing something so convenient? So how do we make shul then more attractive than the neighborhood? How do we make the experience of being together and in person and vibrant, dynamic, and alive and in a holy space something that's worth the inconvenience that we're introducing now?
Wow.
What do you think?
I think it's a challenge. I think we have an advantage in Chicago over what you have in Boca, because we have this thing called winter where outside minyanim really don't work. But I understand that you had rain this past week when you wanted to get started, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu took care of some of your schedules.
Right. No, but so right now the neighborhood minyanim are backyards, but when this passes, they'll just move it indoors and they'll say, the rabbis had no problem with our doing it then, so why can't we do it now? And it'll be convenient. And instead of competing at Simchas Torah morning and competing on Shavuot, a long davening on a Pesach, we're just going to all break away and start our own neighborhood minyan.
And that's going to be part of what we have to find ways to show the value. It's people do want today, the Chinese menu of shuls.
Right.
I grew up, and I'm sure you did as well, in shuls where it was a Yisker day where everything was packed, or when there was a celebration, or even Megillah reading, where Rovam Hadras Melech. And we don't necessarily have that anymore. People are, let's see if I can go to, and at KNS we have this. We have an adult-only Megillah reading where you get a dirty look if you ever try making noise for Haman.
Not only do we have that minyan too, it is the fastest growing and the biggest minyan, and we had to switch spaces to put that minyan in our largest space. And of course, the families and the people of children felt, what does that mean and how terrible that is? But yeah.
Yeah, so that's all of those things were in process when we started. There must have been some amazing positive stories that came out of this time. Were there things, in addition to your daughter getting engaged, were there other things that really came out that surprised you of good things?
I think we've seen the generosity of spirit of a lot of people. Early on, Rabbi Phil Moskowitz, our associate rabbi, really my partner, did an amazing job of coordinating a network, 2 WhatsApp groups, and recruited people. Those who were homebound and needed help for shopping, not necessarily sick, but in an age category or a health condition that they shouldn't have been out, and a team of volunteers who were eager to go out. And we had more volunteers than there were people who needed, and those relationships are continuing until now, of the shopping and the coordinating and the dropping off and seeing that selflessness. In fact, there were some people who volunteered to help and to drop off who themselves should have been having someone shop for them. They shouldn't have been out and about because of their age. But that's the level, I think, of giving that people were eager to, if they felt blessed that they were spared, they wanted to use that to be able to help others. I've seen, I'm sure you have, bat mitzvah, people whose simcha has happened in a very, very, very different way than they ever imagined, but rise to that occasion and with real grace, be able to just absorb what's been thrown at them and have a bar mitzvah over Zoom and only lane one aliyah that isn't even from a Torah with no bracha, and really just roll with the punches and say, this is God's plan and I understand it and this would be the worst thing that ever happened. So there's some real resilience that's come out of people. It's brought out the best of some people. I'll tell you a case of a marriage which was on the rocks and at the risk of falling apart, and being together 24/7 under one roof with children, I would have thought would be like dropping a bomb or lighting a fuse, which would have expedited the end of it, but it did the opposite. Having to cooperate and having to count your blessings and having to keep your children safe and having to be grateful just to get to the end of the day actually brought out the best and turned things around for them. So there have been some extraordinary things. And I'll tell you, most personally and for me, it's been amazing. It's been amazing. I've had the time to take care of myself in ways I haven't for a long time, exercising, eating right. I've spent time with my family. I'm busier than ever during the week, but Shabbos and Yontif, I'm not sure I'm coming back. My career as a Zoom rabbi is about to be launched.
I think we have to open up a new shul for the rabbis in the community. It is true. Shabbos morning, I get up early like I always did, and instead of learning before I go to shul, I daven, and then I have. This last week, I was sitting on the front porch of my house from about 8 o'clock until about 8 o'clock at night with a break for one walk and a break for lunch. And I had a pile of Sfarim.
Unbelievable.
It was a very different, I miss shul tremendously. You wrote a beautiful essay before you opened up shul, but I miss shul tremendously. And yet that personal time is very different for rabbis.
So how will you, my dear mentor, Rabbi Matanki, how do we take that back with us? Right? My wife's got a lot of ideas, and she's right with them. I'm only joking, where she says, you don't always have to be the shul shalashidus, or you see that you can speak at a couple minyanim and pop in at home and still have some time or create a life for yourself. How, now that we've experienced that, how do we carve out and bring some of that back with us to have that not only time but energy to go for a walk on a Shabbos even when we're back together?
I have been thinking, but I don't have answers, obviously, and I appreciate calling mentoring, and somehow we switch sides of this desk of the show. But I do think that one of the things, and I've been speaking with my assistant Rabbi Yechiel Bressler, is we need to look at what we were doing and now say, do we need to do all of those things? Maybe some of the shiurim that we were giving that could have consumed a tremendous amount of time, but didn't have the same response from members, but we did it because of inertia, morph into something else.
Right.
I find the weekdays are much more intense. They are longer. I sit at my desk from first thing in the morning till late at night and trying to get everything in. I'm sure the same is with you.
Right.
But I also have first thing in the morning when I see Margaret, she waves at me when she passes by the room I'm working in. I say, how about we schedule a walk? And when I look at my calendar, we schedule it in advance. And then I said, what time do you want to have dinner? And we schedule that in advance. But there are certain things that are happening that never did before. And I don't have the answers. I'm going to look towards my not that much younger colleagues to help out on this, to figure out how to balance better.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting if we're being honest, and why not?
Because
I
we're
think
being
that
recorded.
yeah, that's okay. I think we can afford to be. I think that so much of what we do is self-imposed. So that if we did consolidate a certain amount of programming or shiurim, or we did alternate, you and your assistant, and here we have the opportunity, who's at the shul shalashidus with going home for shalashidus. There are opportunities where nobody would say boo, nobody would complain or see it as a step back, but we've just really imposed on ourselves expectations that are hard to keep up. And it's almost as if Hashem put a hard stop at it and said, reassess everything. And when you come back, you don't have to immediately turn it on and go right back to everything you were doing. Be a little bit more thoughtful in how you roll it out and what you do, and if you want to last in this.
I really think what I'm thinking, and I'm sure you're doing the same, is looking at all of the things we put in place now, saying what are the things that we can continue. My assistant and I, we work every day. We do 3 minutes of halacha. We're pretty good right around 3 minutes. And it takes some time to prepare, but it has a lot of views and it's archived and people are enjoying it. And I hear good comments about it. And that 3 minutes of halacha, I think, has a bigger payoff than a Gemara share I may give for a smaller group of people. So maybe some of those things that have the big responses we hold on to. Right. Some of the things we did before we will shift. And you're right, it's going to require, but it's also probably one of the bigger challenges is if there is, while we're all being honest, there is competition between rabbis. And it's healthy competition. It's a kinas sofrim. And so if Rabbi X is doing X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and Rabbi Y is only doing X, Y, Z, people say, hey, how come you're not doing those other things as well?
That's definitely fair. And so we have to collaborate in agreeing what we're going to scale back or slow down, or so we can take the pressure off all of us.
It sounds like union organizing we're going to have to talk about.
Yeah.
But I do know one of our dear friends was talking about that in his community in New Jersey, they were talking about cutting back on scholars in residence.
Right.
That, now we have a new way of bringing people from all over the world. We never thought if we would offer something on Zoom that people would show up.
Who heard of Zoom? Maybe business people, like whoever heard the word Zoom before 3 months ago.
I've been using it for over a year, but it's okay. But
you're always on the cutting edge of technology.
No, but I become a mumcha the last couple of months.
Oh.
But no, the reality is, we can go ahead and we can bring somebody in from Israel for a presentation for the shul, and you can have 100 people on the Zoom call. 200 people, whatever it is, and it transforms what we thought had to be in person as well.
So that the jury's out, because that might be amazing on a Sunday morning. Instead of gathering at the shul with the person we've flown in, you save the expense of flying them in and all that, so on. But it could be that the culture of Zoom will shift back too, where after 3 months of staring at a screen, we're all going to go cold turkey and say, you know what? I either want to experience things in person or I'm taking off, but I'm kind of done. I'm done looking at a screen. I'm done dialing in. I'm done being on a Zoom. And so maybe there'll be some balance in the future. It'll be interesting to see. None of us necessarily can predict.
We had at the school at Ida Crown, we had a situation where one of the parents called up and was complaining about the number of hours that there was contact, live hours, synchronous education taking place, that their child needs a break. And fortunately, another parent was on the call and said, so tell me, when your child stops the Zoom calls, what are they doing? They go to their room. And what do they do in their room? They go on their screens and they're watching movies and TV. So our culture to get away from the screens, it may be redirecting some of it and not being totally dependent like we are on now. I miss seeing people in person tremendously, but it'll be an interesting shift back.
Yeah, that's a great point. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What are they saying in Chicago? I didn't get a chance to watch it all. When I grew up, I had Michael Jordan posters all over my room. I was a huge fan. I haven't started watching yet, not because it's like a frum flex, but just because I haven't had a chance yet. I'm saving it for when I can savor it. What are they saying about the Michael Jordan documentary?
It has been full page coverage in the Chicago Tribune every day as it's been going on, and it's been on all the news shows. I think it had two great advantages, and I don't know how you schlepped me into talking about sports, but it had two great advantages. One was there was nothing else happening, so all of a sudden a documentary about sports became as exciting as sports, and it brought back those glory years. So we had members who were traveling out to his house to take a picture in front of the gate with his number on it.
Wow.
In commemoration of all of those glory years of the Chicago Bulls.
Wow.
It's been big news. It's been big news. And I'm sure all of the professional teams from Boca have been very big news as well.
No, all the Boca. Yeah, everybody knows them.
One of the things we know about, my assistant rabbi, unfortunately, is from St. Louis, so he's a little lost. We're trying to remind him that the Chicago Cubs are really the only baseball team of importance. That any team that wants to name yourself after the state bird of Illinois, and you're in St. Louis, is silly. But whatever.
Have any rabbis? I haven't seen any rabbis start a series of shiurim around the Michael Jordan documentary yet. Everyone starts like the Shtisel series, this series. Anyone in Chicago giving shiurim connected to the Michael Jordan documentary?
Hopefully not. Hopefully not, and hopefully we will be able to move forward and have a lot more Torah taking place.
Gotcha.
Rabbi Goldberg, I really appreciate this on two levels this time. One is I love schmoozing with you. We don't get together often enough. Unfortunately, more often than not, we're on a conference call where there's an agenda. Yes. There was no agenda on this except to share your thoughts with our community, and you really, and despite all of your humility, you really have set a bar for what a Rav can do within a community, the way Boca has blossomed and the way BRS has taken off, and your wisdom, your vision. I thank you very much for your time, given that there are 900 families pulling you in every direction, and about another 6 or 7 rabbis who are probably pulling as well on your team. The fact that you were able to give us this half hour today is
my pleasure.
And
it's really my pleasure, my honor. Thank you so much, Rabbi. It's always great to be with you.
It's great to see you, and please send my best to the family and to all of Boca, and tell them when it gets a little too hot in the summer, hopefully we'll allow visitors up north again. And
that would be great.
Shout out to our shared member, Steve Landis.
Absolutely.
Who's watching today, and it's great to have him with us as well.
The best. Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks so much.